Okay, so in this video, we are going to listen and learn together to an episode of English Learning for Curious Minds. How it will work is as follows. We will listen to the episode and I will pause at various points to explain more complicated words and phrases, talk about interesting grammatical structures, and essentially give you a lesson all themed around this podcast episode. Now, the episode we will be working with today is this one on Percy Fawcett, who was an amazing Victorian explorer. Now, I will be sharing my screen with you for the majority of the video. I'll be sharing this, which is the page on our website, leonardoenglish.com, with the transcripts and instant translations and stuff like that. If you like, you can download the study pack for this episode for free. It contains the full transcript, key vocabulary lists, there's a language spotlight section, and a quiz at the end. I'll put a link below this video if you want to download that and follow along for yourself. You'll probably see that there are lots of these purple words, which are the more advanced words and phrases. Now, I'm not going to stop for every single one of those because they're all defined in the study pack and here. But I'll stop for the more interesting ones and we'll talk about them and learn a bit more about them together. Okay, let's just get started, shall we? And I'm going to skip this intro bit because I've already given you a little introduction. Picture the late 19th century. Most maps of the world still had large blank spaces, swathes of uncharted territory, just waiting for someone brave enough or reckless enough to fill them in. Okay, swathes is quite a good word. And what it means, as you can see here, is large areas or sections, but really the meaning behind this is an area so big that no one really knows how big it is. It's just massive, almost uncountable how large it is. Exploration was the ultimate frontier, and it promised fortune, glory, and the chance to write your name into history. Fortune, you might know, often means kind of luck. Someone telling your fortune, someone telling what might happen to you in the future. But in this context, it means money. It's often used together with fame, so someone is looking for fame and fortune, kind of celebrity, being well known, and fortune, a lot of money. Into this era stepped Percy Harrison Fawcett, a dashing, determined British explorer with an uncanny ability to survive conditions that killed lesser men in days. Okay, let's talk about a couple of things there. So, dashing. You might know that the verb to dash means to run fast, normally to try to get something. So, you might say, I had to dash to catch the train. But as an adjective here, if someone is dashing, it means they are kind of handsome, brave, and charismatic. And here also is an interesting word, uncanny. Now, uncanny means kind of strange in a mysterious way. Almost like so strange you can't really believe that it's true or that it could be true. Like, I have this uncanny ability to know when it's going to rain. And another interesting point about uncanny is that you might look at this word and think, I know what canny means. Canny means kind of sly or clever, intelligent. And therefore, uncanny must mean the opposite of it. But actually, it does not. Uncanny and canny have nothing in common. The uncanny is not the opposite of canny. Okay, let's continue. In 1925, at the age of 58, he ventured deep into the Amazon rainforest on a quest for what he believed
was a lost city, a place he called Z.
Now, I'm from the UK, so I say Z. If you're from America, in American English, they will say Z, but we're going to stick with Z.
But shortly after the journey began, he vanished without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that would captivate the world for decades.
A trace, as you see here, is a small sign that he was there. A trace really is any kind of sign of anything, any kind of physical evidence. So if someone is allergic to nuts, they will, of course, be looking out for a little bit of writing on food packaging that says no traces of nuts or something like that. So no even tiny, tiny bits. And without a trace is quite a common set phrase, meaning without any kind of sign. So he disappeared without a trace, he vanished without a trace.
You might remember this story from episode 525, the one on legendary lost cities and civilizations, which came out earlier this year, where we told the story of Fawcett within the context of stories about Atlantis and El Dorado. Now, the stories of Atlantis and El Dorado deserve their own standalone episodes too, but today it is time for Percy Harrison Fawcett. To understand how Fawcett came to risk everything for this mythical city, and most likely pay the ultimate price, we need to rewind to the earliest chapters of his life. Let's start there, with a young man born into a world that seemed to breed explorers as readily as it did aristocrats, often with a very fuzzy line between the two, which was the case of Percy Harrison Fawcett.
Let's talk briefly about this. Breed. Now, you might have come across this word before in the context of animals and farming. Like the farmer breeds cows or breeds sheep or whatever. It's normally used within the context of producing animals. I chose to use it here to emphasize the fact that these explorers and aristocrats are kind of being steadily produced by this world.
He was born in 1867 into a well-to-do British family, Yorkshire gentry that had made a lot of money in shipping in the early days of the British Empire. His father was something of a free spirit, an adventurer, a friend to literary figures, and a bit of a gambler. It was the sort of life one could lead in Victorian England, at least if you were born into a wealthy aristocratic family. There was little concern for work in our modern understanding of the word, and such families would live off large inheritances passed down from generation to generation. So, what did you do as a Victorian aristocrat? Well, you could, of course, sit around playing cards, drinking port, and gambling your family's fortune away, as it seemed Percy Fawcett's father did.
Let's talk about a couple of things here. Now, sit around. This is an interesting phrasal verb because, of course, sit means just be on a chair, be on a table, whatever it might be, if you're just sitting. But if you sit around, it has the meaning of sitting, not doing anything productive or valuable. So if you add around after a verb like sit, it gives the meaning of kind of not really doing anything valuable. You can have sit around, you can laze around, lounge around, or even hang around. These are all phrasal verbs that mean kind of exist, not doing a huge amount and not doing anything particularly valuable. And I just want to alert you to one thing here, and gambling your family's fortune away. If you're just gambling your family's fortune, you might be gambling with it, you might win, you might lose. But if you gamble something away, the meaning is that you are losing it.
But you could also develop other interests. And for some, This took the form of a fascination with distant corners of the globe. Britain was still riding the wave of empire, funding expeditions to map and claim territories on nearly every continent, and the men who had the nerve for it were in high demand.
Okay, if you have the nerve for something, or have the nerves for something, it means you are brave enough to do it. People talk about their nerves, meaning kind of courage. And if you have the nerve for something, that means you are brave enough to do it.
Percy Fawcett would find himself to be one of these men. At the age of 17, he was sent to the Royal Military Academy at Woolwich, where he reportedly learned to regard the risk of death as the most piquant sauce to life. After graduating, he was commissioned into the Royal Artillery, but he quickly discovered that his talents lay beyond conventional soldiering.
Now, this is interesting as well, actually. If something lays beyond something else, it means, literally, it means exists past that thing. But in this context, it means he has greater or more valuable, more important talents than, in this case, conventional soldiering. So he's talented at things more important than being a soldier.
Soldiering. He had a knack for languages and a taste for the exotic.
If you have a knack for something, it means you're naturally good at it. Now, you can say, you've got a real knack for this. Or if you have a knack for something, it means naturally you can do it more easily than other people.
He spent time in Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, Hong Kong, and Malta, and also spent time working as a British spy in North Africa, all by his mid-30s, I should add. This sense of adventure and a clear talent for existing outside his comfort zone almost magnetically drew him to an organisation called the Royal Geographical Society. Now, if you look at the Royal Geographical Society's website today, you'll find that it claims to be the UK's learned society and professional body for geography.
Now, I wanted to stop here because you might have picked up on the fact that I said the UK's learned society, as opposed to the UK's learned society. This is because learned here is an adjective, meaning very educated. And often, words that are adjectives, as opposed to the past participle, you change the stress. So, if this was a verb, you'd say, I have learned. But you're talking about a learned society. Similarly, a word like bless, you say, I have blessed him. But he is blessed. It's a little bit of a niche point, but I wanted to raise that because if you were listening carefully, you might have thought, why has he said learned as opposed to learned? And that's why.
Unless you have a particular passion for geography, this might not sound like the most interesting club in the world. But 150 years ago, it was in the business of creating geography, of sponsoring and supporting expeditions to explore, map, and understand the natural world. It raised money for expeditions in previously uncharted territory and supported the missions of many of the explorers we've talked about before on this show. David Livingstone's African missions, Scott and Shackleton's missions to reach the South Pole, and of course, the research of Charles Darwin. For a young man keen on adventure and with a high tolerance for risk, it was a natural home. The Royal Geographical Society had its sights set on South America and proposed this as an option to Fawcett.
Okay, let's just stop there and talk about this. Had its sights set on, because that might sound like a little bit of a complicated phrase, but if you have your sights set on something, it means you're aiming for it. Imagine you're looking through a pair of binoculars and you're saying, that is what I'm aiming for. You have your sights set on something.
At the time, large parts of Bolivia, Peru, and Brazil were practically unmapped in the eyes of European powers, who were eager to define borders and exploit the land's resources. Fawcett was told by the president of the society that, and I'm quoting directly, the terrain was all but impassable. It would take up to 2 years, and there was no guarantee of survival.
So this one, all but, this means kind of practically, or almost certainly. So the terrain was almost certainly impossible to travel through.
What's more, disease was rampant, and the local Indians, who had been brutally and mercilessly attacked by the rubber trappers, would kill interlopers on sight. This was, by the way, at the height of the rubber boom. So what the president of the society was referring to was the fact that native tribes were now so used to outsiders encroaching on their territory and trying to claim it for themselves that outsiders would typically be greeted by a storm of poisoned darts and arrows. They were not given a warm welcome. So, given all of this, was Fawcett interested in the job? Interested? He thought it was his life's calling. It was what he had been put on this earth to do.
If something is your life's calling or your calling, it's this idea that some divine being, some kind of God, has said, this is what you need to do. This is why you exist, to do this thing.
His first mission was in 1906, and he amazed everyone by returning intact and a year ahead of schedule.
So, intact, here you can see it means not harmed. Technically, it means in one piece, not broken. So, I dropped an antique vase, but miraculously, when I picked it up, it was still intact. When we talk about humans being intact, of course, it's a slightly kind of figurative sense. We mean not harmed, not injured, not damaged.
Not only had he managed it, but he had got the bug. He loved every minute of it, and as soon as he returned to London, he wanted to go straight back.
So, if you get the bug, here we're not talking about a disease or a literal bug. If you get the bug or you get the bug for something, it means you become so interested in it that you just want to do it all the time. It's normally used for kind of dangerous activities, things that you might hurt yourself or harm yourself doing. And of course, this certainly fits into that category.
It didn't take long for his fame to grow, and he became renowned for his skill in surveying these rugged, remote regions.
He'd tramp through mosquito-infested jungles
with bundles of maps and a theodolite, a type of instrument used for surveying territory and measuring angles.
So tramp is this idea of walking a long way, often through difficult or dangerous ground. And of course, mosquito-infested jungles, that certainly qualifies as somewhere that you would probably tramp through.
Undeterred by this incredibly hostile territory, he would calmly record latitudes and longitudes in areas where few outsiders had ever ventured. And with every mission he went on, slowly but surely, more areas of the map would get filled in.
So this is an expression you might know already, slowly but surely. It means something is definitely happening, not very fast, but every time a little bit of progress is being made. So you might say, slowly but surely, my English is getting better. Slowly but surely, more areas of the map would get filled in.
And stories of his exploits spread quickly. He claimed to have shot enormous 20-meter-long anacondas, to have encountered tribes that no other European had seen, and to have a near superhuman resistance to the fevers and diseases that ravaged his fellow explorers.
So, ravaged here is the idea of, really badly harming someone, often in a very kind of fast and unpredictable way. So, you can say that the population was ravaged by disease, let's say.
Other men would get struck down within days or even hours of setting foot into the Amazon. They would be consumed by flesh-eating maggots or larvae. They would be blinded by little worms. There were all manner of diseases and threats that killed or crippled his travelling companions.
So, lots of funny vocabulary here, but let's talk about this. All manner of. You can say all manner of as a way of saying that there are many different kinds of things. So there are all manner of fruits available in the shop at the end of my road, for example. There are all manner of diseases and threats.
But not Fawcett. For some reason, he simply didn't get ill, or at least never seriously ill. He also seemed never to tire. When the going got tough, and his party hadn't eaten for several days, or someone was suffering from a disease, he wouldn't let them lie down to rest.
You probably know this phrase already, but if you don't, it's quite a useful one. The going gets tough, it means things become difficult.
Lying down was giving up. He knew that every time a sick or tired man lay down to rest, it was harder to get back up again. If you died, Fawcett said, you died standing up. Some believe he exaggerated his exploits for fame, but many saw him as the real deal, a man born to explore. As was the norm with Victorian explorers, he recorded everything in a diary and published it on his return. With every new publication, his fame grew. And while he was away on a mission, Victorian England awaited his return and the tales of mystery and adventure that he would come back with.
Now, I just want to pause here quickly and talk about this word, await. Now, you probably know the word wait. You might also know the verb await, but you might not know the difference between them. Really, they mean very similar things. Await is slightly more formal, more kind of literary, which is why I chose to use it here. And there's another grammatical point that you should be aware of, is that if you use await, you need to have an object. So, await his return. You can't just await, full stop. You have to await something. Whereas wait, you can wait for the bus, or I will wait for my friend, or you can just say, I will wait.
Along the way, there were rumours that he had never really left the Secret Service, and that he was still working as a British spy. Mapping distant frontiers, after all, was often as politically useful as it was scientifically exciting. Yet, for Fawcett, there seemed to be something more profound than mere map-making. In his conversations with indigenous communities, he heard tales of a great city hidden far into the rainforest, a place filled with monumental architecture and advanced culture. Local lore described it in hushed tones. This was no simple village of huts, but something far older, far grander.
Let's pause very quickly and talk about this in hushed tones. So, hushed means kind of quiet. You might say to someone who's making too much noise, hush, hush, especially to a child, hush. And in hushed tones means specifically trying to talk quietly. Here, it doesn't literally mean quietly, but it means kind of in secret. As if you have a secret, you might say, come over here, I need to tell you something. That's in hushed tones.
It initially seemed like folklore, a tale passed down through generations, but then he found it mentioned in a manuscript in the National Library in Rio de Janeiro. The more he looked, the more clues seemed to point to the existence of this city he called Zed. And, what's more, Machu Picchu was discovered high in the hills of Peru in 1911. Fawcett took this as yet more evidence that the jungles and mountains of South America held secrets that were yet to be discovered.
Okay, let's pause and just talk about this sentence, because we have two different meanings of the word yet. So Fawcett took this as yet more evidence. Here, it's being used as an intensifier, saying that there was already evidence, but here is even more evidence. So it's like saying there is an additional piece of evidence. I have yet more things to tell you. Or he has made yet another mistake, another one on top of mistakes that were made in the past. And we also have this yet held secrets that were yet to be discovered. This means still or up to this point. So at this point in time, these secrets had not been discovered. So just in this sentence, we've got two different meanings of the word yet.
And somewhere, deep in the Amazon, was Zed. He became convinced that if he could find such a city, it would rewrite what the world believed about human civilization in the Amazon. Now, this was in the early 20th century, and just as his obsession was reaching a fever pitch, Europe descended into the chaos of the First World War. Fawcett, at this time, was nearly 50 years old, hardly the age at which one typically enlists for frontline service. Nevertheless, he had a deep sense of patriotism, he had extensive military and leadership experience, and he believed his country needed him. He was probably right. He returned to Britain, traded his machete and compass for an officer's uniform, and headed into the trenches of northern France. The horrors he witnessed there changed him forever. Young men, boys really, were being sent over the top into a maelstrom of machine gun fire, poison gas, and artillery barrages. It was a grim lesson in how civilized nations could turn technology and organization into instruments of mass destruction.
Now, let's talk about this. Grim. Here, it's defined as serious and unpleasant. But it really goes beyond this in some ways, because it's something that's really kind of fundamentally dark and depressing. Like, that's really grim. That's so horrible, it's almost hard to comprehend. And of course, this is certainly a time to use an adjective like grim.
Destruction. Amid the mud, blood, and sheer senselessness of it all, Fawcett began to question the supposed superiority of Western progress.
This is another good word, sheer, meaning very great or extreme. It can also mean kind of completely vertical in the context of a cliff or something like that. But here we use it to mean kind of a complete senselessness, the sheer senselessness. You can use it with lots of other kind of descriptive nouns as well, like the sheer absurdity of the situation.
If this was what civilization had to offer, was it truly more advanced than the tribal societies he had encountered in the Amazon? During those long, haunted nights on the Western Front, his mind drifted back to the lush green canopy of South America, to the gentle currents of unknown rivers, and to the stories of that hidden city. Perhaps, he mused, the true measure of civilization wasn't bombs and factories and industrial output, but wisdom and harmony, qualities that might lie undiscovered beneath the rainforest's thick foliage. Unlike a large proportion of the young men he commanded, Fawcett survived the Somme. And when the war ended, he wasted no time returning to his life's mission. Now in his late 50s, hardly an age most men would choose to slog through dense undergrowth in searing heat, he was more determined than ever.
You might remember from a few minutes back, we had tramp, meaning to kind of walk long distances through difficult terrain. Slog means a very similar thing. Here we've translated it as work hard. But in the context of kind of walking, it can mean kind of work hard to get through. And dense meaning thick, of course.
He returned first in 1920, but the mission was a failure. Bad weather conspired against him, and the now 53-year-old wasn't quite as young and nimble as he had been 15 years before.
Now, if someone conspires against someone else, they kind of secretly work together to do something bad to someone else or to stop them from achieving something. But you can also use it in a more figurative sense. So, bad weather conspired against him. This is not suggesting that there are some great forces, some kind of great divine forces that were working against him, just that the weather was bad and it made his life difficult.
Plus, his legendary resistance to tropical disease seemed to be weakening. He fell ill, too ill to continue the mission, and had to return to England. But if you had thought this would have been enough to put him off for life, well, you would be wrong. For Fawcett, this was a temporary setback, and he soon started planning another mission. The problem was that he didn't have the money to do it. Although he was what we would probably call a celebrity explorer by this point, he didn't find it easy to find anyone willing to pay for the trip. The Royal Geographical Society had mixed feelings about further expeditions. By then, Fawcett had a reputation as something of a maverick, difficult to control, and past his prime as an Amazonian explorer.
We didn't define this in the transcripts, but if you have mixed feelings, basically it means you don't want to do something. It's a polite way of saying, yes, there are some positives and some negatives, but really it means that you're not so keen on doing it. You don't want to do it.
Yet, he managed it. He managed to secure just enough funding, some from newspaper deals and some from private backers, to return to the Amazon. His plan was straightforward and audacious. Travel into uncharted territory, gather fresh evidence, and come out triumphant. Maybe with gold, maybe with tales of a living civilization beyond the scope of imagination.
Scope meaning kind of what you can see, and scope of imagination meaning everything that can be possibly imagined. So if it's beyond this, it's so amazing, so wonderful that we can't even begin to imagine how wonderful it is.
Some people called him delusional. Others saw him as a visionary. Fawcett himself was unwavering, but he decided not to make the journey alone. He recruited his son Jack, along with Jack's friend, a young man named Raleigh Rimmel. They set off in 1925, going up rivers, cutting through dense jungle, and negotiating passage with tribes that had rarely, if ever, encountered outsiders.
So, encountered is another word for meet. So, it's in the past tense, so met. But the idea here is that you have met someone by chance. You didn't know you were going to meet them, and you bumped into them, or in this case, you were minding your own business in the Amazon, and Percy Fawcett and Jack and Raleigh Rimmel turned up.
For a while, all went well. Fawcett sent intermittent updates via runners who carried letters back to the edges of the jungle, where telegraphs could relay his words to the wider world. He sounded enthusiastic, confident even.
So let's just talk about this. He sounded enthusiastic, confident even, because it's a little bit of an odd structure, one you might not have encountered before, having even at the end of a sentence. What it means here is that it's surprising that he was the previous thing, in this case, confident. So he sounded enthusiastic and he was even confident. So it implies that something is surprising. It shouldn't necessarily be the case, but it was. You could flip this sentence around and it could be, he sounded enthusiastic, even confident. It means the same thing. But this is just a slightly more kind of figurative, dramatic way of saying it.
Soon, though, the messages stopped. In his last known letter, written about a month into the journey, Fawcett described how they were about to push into completely uncharted territory. After that point, nothing more was heard. He, Jack, and Rimmel effectively vanished. No one knows exactly what happened. Some guess they succumbed to disease or starvation. Others suspect they ran afoul of a hostile tribe. A few spin wilder theories that Fawcett discovered Zed, decided to stay, and purposefully vanished from Western civilization.
Now, you might know spin, meaning to kind of turn very fast on an axis. So something spins around. But if you spin a story, it's this idea of kind of telling a kind of fanciful and very dramatic story, often for effect.
Their disappearance ignited a feverish obsession. Adventurers from around the globe tried to retrace Fawcett's steps. And many didn't make it out of the Amazon. An estimated 100 explorers died or disappeared themselves in the search for the British trio. So many that by the 1930s, the Brazilian government banned further attempts to find him, fearing the toll on human life.
Now, you probably know a toll, meaning the fee that you might pay if you go on a road, let's say a motorway. But if there is the toll on human life, for example, it's the kind of the damage caused by something.
Find him, fearing the toll on human life. And over the decades, rumours spread. Bones were found here or there, or a tribe told stories of a tall, white-haired stranger. But no definitive proof of Fawcett's fate has ever come to life. Despite the countless expeditions launched to uncover the truth, Fawcett's remains have never been identified. Whatever happened to him, the Amazon has guarded her secrets well. And, in a sense, Fawcett's obsession may not have been in vain.
So, in vain meaning without success, with nothing to show for it.
He might have been right. Recent archaeological studies have revealed that parts of the Amazon once supported large, complex societies, lending credibility to the idea that advanced civilizations could exist there, hidden from outside eyes.
Credibility, meaning being believable or trustworthy. And if you lend credibility, or if something lends credibility to the idea about something, it means it supports the fact that something could be true.
Though Fawcett never returned to prove the existence of Zed, his conviction that the region was more than just a green desert was remarkably prescient. Today, Percy Fawcett is often called the real-life Indiana Jones, a moniker that suits his larger-than-life persona and daring exploits. Clearly, he was a fascinating character, but was full of contradictions. An imperial agent, but an open-minded explorer. A Victorian aristocrat, but one who started to question the superiority of European civilization. An apparently loving husband and father, but one who took his oldest son to his death. A man who knew full well that he might not return from the mission, but went anyway.
Now, this is quite a good little phrase. If you know something full well, it means you know it completely. You absolutely know that something is the case. Like, I know full well that I should go home right now. I know full well that I should not go on that trip to the Amazon.
So, let me leave you with a quote widely attributed to Percy Fawcett, which seems to sum up his attitude rather well.
Sum up, you probably know, means to add two things together. 2 plus 2 equals 4. You're summing up 2 and 2. But if you sum up someone's character or their attitude, it means that you kind of provide a summary of it. You say this is a way of explaining something.
It should be remembered that the difficulties are great and the tale of disasters a long one, for the few remaining unknown corners of the world exact a price for their secrets.
Okay, last one is exact. So you probably know exact as an adjective, meaning kind of precise or accurate, like the exact time I need to go is 3 o'clock. But you can also use exact as a verb, and it means to kind of demand or require, often as kind of a price or punishment for something. So here he's saying that if you want to explore these unexplored corners of the world, then you need to pay a heavy price for that. And of course, in the case of Percy Fawcett, the price he paid was his life. Okay, well, that's the end of the episode. This was also the first of these kind of listen and learn videos that I've made. So let me know in the comments if you like them, what you liked, what you didn't like, and which episode we should do next. And of course, that was an episode of the podcast English Learning for Curious Minds. If you don't listen to that already, it's available in all podcast apps. Just search for English Learning for Curious Minds and it'll pop up there. Okay, thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.